Mr. President, I'd like to address the comments that were just made by the Republican majority leader about the issue of health care. What he said today, I've never heard him say before. He said it was the fault of the Democrats for refusing to work with the Republicans to change the Affordable Care Act. I'd not heard that before, and I find it an interesting suggestion, because what happened after the House of Representatives passed a measure 3 weeks ago to change the health care system in America, the issue then came to the Senate but didn't go through the regular order of business. It's my understanding, been reported widely in the press, that Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, assembled a group of 13 Republican senators who are meeting in private over the last 3 weeks to discuss an alternative to the health care bill that passed in the House of Representatives. There are no Democrats in that room, none have been invited, and incidentally, there are no women in that room from the Republican side. 13 male senators meeting in private. And so to hear this suggestion from the Republican leader that the real problem they're running into is that the Democrats aren't helping, we weren't invited to this party. They are meeting privately to come up with something, and I don't know what it might be. But I've got an idea of how we can achieve a bipartisan real effort when it comes to health care in America. I would suggest that we create a committee in the United States Senate. I have a name for it, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. I suggest that we have 12 Republicans and 11 Democrats on that committee. And I would suggest that they sit down, take the bill sent by the House, and improve it, make it better. Now, this suggestion is such a good one that the committee already exists. It is under the chairmanship of Lamar Alexander, whom I respect personally very much, and ranking member Patty Murray of the state of Washington, a Democrat. I know, having spoken to Senator Murray, she's ready to roll up her sleeves and go to work and to write a revision to the health care bill, the health care system in America. But there have been no hearings, none, on the measure passed by the House of Representatives. So when the Republican leader says he wishes the Democrats would join in the effort, this committee is ready and willing to work. And I'm sure if he picked up the phone and called Senator Alexander and Senator Murray, they could get to work on doing a much better job than what the House of Representatives did. Why am I so critical of the House of Representatives? Not because of the traditional rivalry between the chambers, but because yesterday the Congressional Budget Office took a look at the bill that passed the U.S. House of Representatives 3 weeks ago by 2 votes. It was all Republicans voting for it. It passed by 2. A number of Republicans refused to support it. It had no support from the Democratic side. It was an unusual bill because it went out of the regular order of business. The regular order of business suggests that when you're going to do something that might have an impact, a large impact on America, you should go to an agency that is nonpartisan, expert in the field, that will analyze your bill and tell you what impact it will have. Most of us think we have pretty good ideas for making America a better place to live and good ideas for legislation, but luckily we have something called the Congressional Budget Office, which sometimes brings us back down to earth and says it might not work exactly as you thought it would work. And so traditionally, bills, significant bills that affect a lot of Americans and families and things important like health care are submitted to the Congressional Budget Office so they can analyze them and decide the impact that they will have. Well, 3 weeks ago, Speaker Paul Ryan and the Republicans in the House said something I'd not heard before in my service in Congress. They said, we're not going to wait for this analysis. We're going to vote on this bill even before the Congressional Budget Office has a chance to analyze its impact. Remember, we're talking about changing the health care system in America, and that literally impacts every single American. It's 1/6 of our nation's economy. And you would think that before anyone was bold enough to suggest they wanted to change the system, they would at least send their proposal to the Congressional Budget Office for an analysis. The Republicans in the House failed to do so, refused to do so, passed the measure by 2 votes and sent it to the Senate. So yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office completed its analysis. And now that we have an analysis of what's known as Trumpcare, or the Republican health care approach, it's pretty clear why they didn't want the Congressional Budget Office to take a look at it. This is what the Congressional Budget Office reported publicly last night. Next year, under the Republican proposal for health care reform, 14 million Americans will lose their health insurance. Over the next 10 years, 23 million Americans will lose their health insurance. Do you remember when we started this conversation? The goal was to make sure we changed the laws in America so more Americans would have the protection of health insurance. Just the opposite occurs if the Republican plan goes forward. The second thing we were looking for as a goal in health care reform was to reduce the rate of growth in health insurance premiums. Every one of us knows what that's all about. Health insurance premiums costs have been going up way too high for way too long. So the Republicans have been critical of the current system, saying the cost of health insurance going up too fast, and so they put in their reform proposal, which passed the House of Representatives. Here's what the Congressional Budget Office has to say about the Republican approach. Next year, premiums for health insurance will increase by 20% in the individual market. That is the market where we've seen this dramatic growth in cost already, and the Republican plan makes it worse. The third thing we find is this argument by the Republicans that somehow the current health care system in America, the Affordable Care Act, is in a death spiral. Listen to what the Congressional Budget Office says about the health insurance market in America today. The CBO affirms that under current law, health insurance marketplaces, are stable. However, under the Republican repeal bill, 1 out of every 6 Americans will be living in part of this country where the individual market would become unstable as a result of the Republican bill. So instead of stabilizing the market and ending the so-called death spiral, the Republican bill makes it worse. It turns out that when you take a close look at this so-called death spiral, you find the Republicans have their hands around the throat of the health care system of America, choking it and claiming, this patient is not looking good, doctor. If they would stop their efforts to sabotage the current system and work to improve it and make it stronger, then we could save health insurance for a lot of Americans and bring stability to the system. The Republican bill at its heart is not about health care, though. It's about tax cuts. The Republican proposal for health care reform starts with eliminating almost $900 billion in taxes paid by the wealthiest people in America. By taking $900 billion out of the health care system, they're unable to keep health insurance alive for so many Americans. The Republican approach eliminates $834 billion in the federal Medicaid program. What is the federal Medicaid program? Let me give you 3 examples of what it is. In Illinois today, half of the babies that are born are paid for, their medical care is paid for by the Medicaid system. Prenatal care for mom, so the baby's healthy, the delivery of the baby, and postnatal care afterwards. These are lower income individuals. Half of them are paid for by Medicaid. But that's not the most expensive part of Medicaid. The most expensive part of Medicaid is for your mom and dad and your grandmother and grandfather who are in a nursing home and have no savings left. All they have Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's the most expensive part of Medicaid. And those who are disabled living in my state, in Alabama, in New York and other states, disabled people in low income need medical care and they rely on Medicaid. So when the Republican health care reform and repeal cuts $800 billion plus out of Medicaid, it's at the expense of the groups I just mentioned. Babies and moms, elderly people in nursing homes, and the disabled. Those are the ones who will see a cutback in medical services so that we can give a $900 billion tax cut to the wealthiest people in America. I know that Democratic leaders here, and I want to yield the floor when he arrives, but I want to close by telling you a story. Yesterday, I had three moms and a dad who brought their children to a press conference. It was a great press conference, if I may say so. These kids stole the show, as they should. Each one of them had a compelling story about having survived a terrible illness. Many of them were cancer victims. Moms told stories. One mom said, "I was changing my little girl and I noticed a lump in her abdomen. It turned out to be a neuroblastoma cancer tumor. It was removed, and my little girl spent weeks, months in the hospital, and she's still going back." Each one of them told the story. And as you looked at these kids smiling and happy and bouncing around, you thought to yourself, thank goodness. Thank goodness for America with its great medical care. And thank goodness these families had health insurance, because they were there concerned about what the Republicans are doing when it comes to pre-existing conditions. Because these kids have survived cancer, they're risky from an insurance viewpoint. We decided 6 years ago to put an end to that worry for these families. You cannot discriminate against a person or a family in America based on a pre-existing condition. And thank goodness, because 1 out of 3 of us have a pre-existing condition. The Republican approach takes away that protection and says that governors can ask for a waiver so that health insurance in their state can discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. So 3 moms and a dad came yesterday and said, please stop this Republican plan. What will our family do? Our kids have pre-existing conditions. We can't afford to see our premiums go through the roof because the Republicans withdraw this protection. That's the real life consequences of this debate. This isn't just about a lot of politicians on Capitol Hill blowing hot air. It's about families, real families with real kids and real challenges, and whether they're going to have real protection when they need it. The Congressional Budget Office yesterday came out with a report and said the measure that passed the House, the Republican measure, is a disaster for families across America. We've got to stop it. We've got to do everything in our power to do it. And I might say to my friend from New York, the Democratic leader, that when the Republican leader comes to the floor this morning and says, why won't the Democrats join us in repairing the Affordable Care Act? I would say to the Republican leader, open the door of that room where you have 13 male Republican senators sitting down and debating the future of health care. Open the door, open the windows, and let's have an honest, open, bipartisan conversation, not about repealing our health care system, but making it stronger, protecting the very families that showed up yesterday at a press conference I'm going to remember for a long time.